She was just another nurse on the night shift, overworked, unseen, and fast asleep on a break room couch. But when a cold and distant surgeon walked in and saw her like that, something inside him broke open. What followed was a chain of quiet actions that would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The clock on the wall read 3:14 a.m., and the hallways of Willowgate General Hospital were unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists in the deep hours of the night, when even the fluorescent lights seem tired, humming gently above. Cold linoleum floors. Dr. Samir Navin walked slowly through the corridor, a half-empty coffee cup in one hand and a storm of thoughts in the other. He wasn't supposed to be there, not at that hour, not after working a 12-hour day already. But an unexpected emergency had brought him in just after midnight. A young patient with a brain hemorrhage, the kind of case he couldn't say no to. Not with his hands, not with his history. And now that the surgery was done, he couldn't bring himself to leave. His footsteps echoed down the sterile hall, where the only signs of life were the soft beeps of heart monitors and the occasional whisper of nurses exchanging notes at the station. Dr. Navin was a man of few words, even fewer smiles, known for his surgical precision and calm demeanor, but also for the invisible wall he kept around himself. To the staff, he was brilliant but distant, respected but unreachable, like a statue. In a white coat, carved from marble, but inside, there were stories he didn't tell, memories he didn't visit. As he passed the staff break room, something made him pause. The light inside was dim, a soft yellow glow spilling out through the half-open door. Curiosity, or maybe instinct, made him look inside. And there she was, Nurse Leona Grace, curled up in the corner of a plastic couch, fast asleep, her back against the armrest, her legs tucked in, one arm cradling a faded backpack like a pillow. Her shoes were off, her socks mismatched, and the skin around her ankles swollen and red. Her name badge was cracked, hanging loosely by one metal pin. Her scrubs looked like they'd seen too many shifts in a row, and her phone, screen chipped and flickering, lit up softly on the table next to her with the name Grandma calling. It buzzed twice, then stopped. Dr. Navin didn't move. He just stood there, one foot inside the doorway, watching quietly. There was something deeply human in the way she slept, not lazily, but as if sleep had caught her while she was trying to stay strong. The way a body gives up only when it can't keep pushing anymore. He had seen Nurse Leona before, always moving, always helping. The kind of nurse who remembered not just names but stories, who stayed behind to listen when no one else had time. The kind of nurse who knew that kindness mattered just as much as medicine. He remembered once seeing her kneel beside an elderly patient to tie his slippers, another time, calming a teenager after a panic attack. She did it all without expecting thanks, and perhaps because of that, she rarely got any. Dr. Navin stepped closer and noticed a small bruise on her wrist, the kind that comes from bumping into bed corners too many times. And for a moment, something flickered behind his composed exterior, a feeling he hadn't let in for a long time. He took off his coat slowly, careful not to wake her, and placed it over her like a blanket, his movements gentle, like he was folding a memory. He stood there for a few more seconds, looking at the way her face softened in sleep, and then turned to leave. As he walked away, he didn't finish his coffee, didn't check his pager, didn't return to his office. Instead, he found himself wandering deeper into the hospital. Into the past. He thought of his mother, who used to fall asleep in hospital laundry rooms during her second shift, her apron stained, her hands cracked from cleaning chemicals. She would hold him on her lap when he was 5, whispering stories into his ear between shifts, promising things would get better. They never quite did, not for her, but they did for him. He made it, scholarships, medical school, all the degrees and awards, but he had buried something along the way, something he didn't even know was missing until he saw that nurse asleep on the couch. He sat down in an empty waiting area, the silence surrounding him like a blanket. Not the kind that warms you, but the kind that reminds you how cold the world can be when no one is watching. He didn't know yet what he would do, not exactly. But something inside him had shifted. A thread pulled loose from the tightly woven fabric of his routine. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about surgery or success or headlines. He was thinking about tired feet, missed calls from family, and the quiet courage of those who keep giving, even when no one says thank you. And as he sat there, in the stillness of the night, a seed of an idea began to grow. Not loud, not grand, just small and human, like the beat of a heart that refuses to quit, because sometimes the beginning of change isn't in a big decision, but in a quiet hour in the middle of the night, when a man with a past sees someone else's present and chooses finally to see. The sun had not yet risen, but the city outside Willowgate General Hospital was beginning to stretch its limbs. Traffic lights blinked lazily at empty intersections, and the early buzz of morning life started to whisper through the walls inside the hospital. Nurse Leona Grace was just waking up, her eyes heavy, her body stiff from sleeping in the break room chair. She blinked at the coat draped over her. Confused at first, then quietly folded it and placed it on the nearby table. Her phone, now dead, still showed the last missed call from her mother. She sighed, slipped her sore feet back into her shoes, and prepared for the rest of her shift. What she didn't know was that Dr. Navin was still there, not in the break room, but upstairs in the empty staff lounge, sitting near the window with a coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't gone home, hadn't returned to his office. Instead, he sat watching the street lamps flicker out one by one as daylight crept in. His mind wasn't on the hospital anymore, or even the surgery from the night before. It had returned somewhere deeper, somewhere older, a place he rarely visited and never out loud remembered being 8 years old. Sitting on a cracked bench at Riverside Bus Terminal, his feet barely touching the ground, his mother sitting beside him in her wrinkled nursing uniform, her eyes closed just for a minute, her head resting on her lunchbox like a pillow. She hadn't slept in 2 days, working overtime at the care home and the local clinic just to pay for his school shoes. He remembered tugging her sleeve gently when the bus arrived, and the way she smiled through her exhaustion, telling him that rest was something you learned to live without, that being tired was a sign you were doing enough. But even then, he had known it wasn't right. Remembered the day she fainted in the kitchen, the thud of her body hitting the floor, the cold panic of dialing emergency services on a phone that barely had signal. She had pushed herself too far, and no one had stopped her, because people like her didn't ask for help, and no one thought to offer her. Navin blinked slowly. Returning to the present, the city outside was now fully awake. Cars rushing down wet streets, horns blaring in the distance, but he sat still, cradling the past like a fragile thing in his hands. That morning, as Nurse Leona passed him in the hallway, she offered a polite nod and a tired smile. She didn't mention the coat, and neither did he. They just passed like people often do in busy places. But he turned after she left and watched her disappear around the corner. For the rest of the day, he found his thoughts returning to her more than once. Not in a romantic way, not in the way of novels or daydreams, but in the way someone remembers a story they almost forgot they were part of. He started asking quiet questions, not directly, but through conversations with other staff. He learned she had been working nights for nearly 6 months straight, often taking extra shifts for coworkers who had kids or emergencies. Even though she had 2 daughters of her own, he found out her oldest had asthma and that Leona sometimes took video calls from the hospital bathroom just to help her with homework. Heard from the janitor that Leona often brought extra snacks and shared them with other nurses. And from the receptionist that she once used her entire bonus to help a patient's family pay for a taxi home. Navin listened to all of it, quietly, storing each detail like threads in a tapestry he hadn't realized he was weaving. The more he heard, the heavier it became, not with guilt, but with recognition. It wasn't just about Leona, It was about everyone like her, the ones who showed up, stayed late, carried burdens in silence, and did it without applause. He began wondering when he had stopped seeing them, when the lines between leadership and loneliness had become so clear. Later that evening, he returned to his office, not to work, but to search. He opened files, reviewed staff logs, pulled up shift schedules, and stared at numbers that told stories few ever read. Names repeated across endless nights. Debts recorded quietly, stress leaves denied. Transportation forms left incomplete. He saw her name again and again, like a song playing beneath the noise of the hospital, and suddenly, he couldn't unhear it in a moment of stillness. He took out a small yellow notepad from his drawer, something he hadn't touched in years, and began to write, not medical notes, not research, but a letter, short, quiet, and honest, to the ones who keep the light on when no one's watching. He wrote, "I see you." He didn't know what he would do next. Not fully, but he knew he had to do something. He couldn't walk past tired faces anymore without remembering the weight behind their eyes. Echoes from the past were no longer just memories. They were marching down the halls of the present, asking gently but firmly to be heard, and this time, Dr. Navin was ready to listen. The rain had started falling just before sunrise, soft and steady, tapping gently on the windows of Willowgate General Hospital, like a reminder that even the sky needed to release its weight sometimes. Inside the staff lounge, Nurse Leona Grace sat quietly with a cup of tea between her hands. She looked down at her phone, her tired eyes scanning a new email that had just come through. Her schedule was different. She blinked, leaned closer, and checked again to be sure. Instead of another string of back-to-back night shifts, her name now appeared on daytime rotations, Monday to Friday, no weekends, no overnights. She scrolled down in disbelief, her hands trembling slightly. She had never requested this change, not because she didn't want it, but because she knew it wasn't possible. Or so she thought. Confused, she clicked on the second email. It was from the Stella Credit Union, a small loan service connected with the hospital. The subject line read, "Status, loan resolved." Her balance now showed 0. Leona sat there frozen, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, the steam from her tea slowly fading. She glanced around the room, half expecting someone to walk in and explain it all. But there was only silence. She stood up and walked quickly to the nurse's station, her breath short, her pulse racing. In her mailbox sat a white envelope with her name written in neat handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a folded note on hospital letterhead, no signature, just a simple message. Some hands lift quietly. "When you're too tired to ask, you don't need to do this alone anymore." Her eyes welled with tears. Not out of sadness, but relief. The kind that only comes when someone finally notices your struggle. The kind that catches you off guard, because you stopped expecting it. Leona stepped outside for air. The rain was light now, more like a mist, and she let it touch her face. She called her mother and told her she'd be home in time for dinner, for the first time in months. And when her mother asked why, Leona could only whisper, "I think someone helped me. I just don't know who." Across the hospital, Dr. Navin watched the scene from a window in his office. He didn't smile, not fully, but there was something softer in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Hadn't signed the note, hadn't attached his name to the new schedule or the loan adjustment, and he didn't plan to. It wasn't about recognition, it was about remembering. About breaking the habit of looking past the people who hold everything together from behind the scene. Had spent the last few days speaking to hospital administration, finance, and the union board, quietly negotiating, adjusting policies, unlocking funds that had been sitting unused for years. He called it an internal initiative, something small and personal. He named it Quiet Champions. The program offered night shift nurses and hospital support staff transportation credits, childcare vouchers, emergency grants, and access to mental health services. It started quietly, with only a few names added at first, including Leona Grayson. Then something unexpected happened. Word spread, not loudly, but like whispers carried on wind. A janitor found a note in his locker with a bus pass and the words, "You matter." A cafeteria worker received a voucher for her daughter's school fees along with a small envelope of groceries left on her cart, and slowly, the hospital began to feel differently. His name began to appear in meetings, staff conversations, and suggestion boxes. People noticed. She was lighter on her feet, more present, less tired. Someone suggested she help shape the future of the program, and by the end of the week, she was officially invited to serve as the hospital's staff wellness coordinator. It came with better hours, more pay, and a desk of her own. But more than that, it came with purpose. She now had the chance to help others the way someone had helped her. Even if she didn't yet know who that someone was, Leona sat at her new desk one evening, writing out welcome letters for the new hires she included. Small notes in each one, words like, "You're not alone here, and your work is seen." She believed now in the power of invisible kindness, of unseen hands that lifted without expecting anything in return. Navin passed by her office that same night, his steps slower, his presence softer. She looked up and nodded to him, not knowing fully what he had done, but sensing something anyway. Their eyes met briefly, and though no words were exchanged, something warm passed between them, the kind of understanding that doesn't need to be spoken, the kind of thank you that lives in silence. And as she returned to her work, and he walked on down the hallway, the hospital kept humming with quiet life, with new hope growing in the spaces where fatigue once lived. Because sometimes change doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it comes on quiet feet, through unseen hands, carrying the weight that others no longer have to. Spring came quietly to Willowgate. The trees outside the hospital dressed themselves in soft green, and the morning air carried the scent of something fresh. Inside the hospital, things had begun to shift too, not in loud or obvious ways, but in the small spaces, in the smiles exchanged between co-workers, in the lightness in the voices of those who used to sound worn thinner. Leona Grace stood at the front of the conference room, her hands steady as she adjusted the microphone. The room was filled with nurses, custodians, cafeteria workers, and aides, people who had spent years in the background, often unnoticed, now seated with attention and purpose. That day, she was leading a workshop on balance, not just work and life, but rest and responsibility, care and boundaries. She spoke with calm strength, not reading from notes, but from memory, from experience, from the quiet place inside her that once carried the weight alone. Shared her story, not in full detail, but just enough to remind those listening that their pain had value, that their sacrifices meant something. She reminded them that showing up mattered, and that rest wasn't a luxury, but a right. Samir Navin stood near the back of the room, leaning against the doorframe, his arms folded, a rare softness in his posture. He had come not to speak, but to listen, to watch her lead with the same heart she once poured into tired patients. And midnight rounds. Their eyes met briefly, and she smiled, not a question in it, just quiet recognition, as if to say, "You're still here," and he nodded, not a grand gesture, but enough to answer, "Yes, I'm here." The Quiet Champions initiative had grown since its start, supported now by donations, hospital grants, and even a small feature in the local newspaper. Families of patients had contributed, grateful for the care they received from staff who now had room to breathe. Nurse Leona had been promoted again, now overseeing hospital-wide staff well-being programs. Her daughters had started leaving hand-drawn cards in the staff lounge with messages like, "Thank you for being kind, and you're doing your best." No one knew at first they came from her kids, but it didn't matter. The notes stayed pinned to bulletin boards and coffee machines like small pieces of sunshine. That night, the hospital held its annual appreciation gala, a quiet event held in the courtyard under strings of soft lights. Music played low in the background, and the smell of fresh flowers mixed with the warm evening breeze when Leona's name was called for the Lantern Award, the highest honor given to a member of the care staff. She hesitated for just a second before standing. Applause rose around her like a wave, not from strangers, but from people who had seen her fight through days, She never talked. Ibuchi stepped onto the stage, took the small glass lantern in her hands, and looked out at the crowd. She didn't speak about herself, not much anyway. Instead, she pointed toward the back of the crowd, where Dr. Navin stood, still quiet, still watching. I used to believe that people like me were meant to stay in the background, she said, her voice steady. Meant to work hard, keep our heads down, and never expect to be seen. But then one day, someone did see me, not just my face, but the exhaustion in my bones, the struggle in my steps, the life I was trying to hold together after my shift ended. She paused, the lantern glowing gently in her hands, and they didn't just notice. They did something, quietly, without asking for thanks. They gave me space to breathe again, and because of that, I learned that kindness doesn't need an audience to matter. It only needs intention. The crowd stood, not just for her, but for what she represented. And somewhere in the middle of the applause, Dr. Navin looked down, as if hearing the echo of his mother's voice reminding him of the promise he once made. After the ceremony, the two of them found themselves standing side by side near the garden wall. The night air cool but gentle. Do you think your mother would have been proud of all this? Leona asked, holding a glass of sparkling water in one hand. He looked up at the stars, took a quiet breath, and smiled. She would have said, about time you did something that mattered to more than just your resume. They both laughed, not loud, but the kind that fills your chest. There was no big goodbye, no dramatic music or flash of lights, just two people who had once been strangers, now joined by a quiet understanding that the smallest acts often carry the deepest meaning. As they parted ways, the wind picked up slightly, and a folded note fell from one of the table centerpieces nearby. The janitor, a man who had worked there for 23 years, picked it up and opened it. Inside was a message. You matter more than you know. The light stays on because of people like you, QC. He folded it gently, tucked it into his pocket, and smiled. And so the story continued, not in headlines or speeches, but in moments like that, in lanterns passed quietly from hand to hand, lighting the way for those who come next. Because sometimes, the most powerful change begins not with noise, but with one tired soul, one generous heart, and one quiet choice to see what others ignoring. That, in the end, was more than enough.